Hi everybody, it's Howard and Rachel from Taste Argentina. Delighted to have Lee Evans from Condor Wines with us this evening. Lee's kindly agreed to spend 10 minutes or so with us just to introduce a couple of wines that he really enjoys with the festive season and with dinner over that period. So Lee's come to have a chat with us this evening. Hi Lee.
Good evening. How are you both?
Yeah, all good, thank you.
We're allowed to say Merry. No, we can't say Merry Christmas yet, can we? We're way off that.
We're way off. We're a week away.
It feels close,
2 weeks away.
You can say Merry Christmas.
Yeah, well, you know, if people might be watching this around Christmas time, so it could be appropriate or relevant.
Yeah, Christmas Day viewing before the Queen's speech.
Yes. So with Christmas in mind, I think the first wine is perfect. So the first wine I have here is the Verum. I don't know if you can see that. The Verum Chardonnay, which is from a producer called Bodega Dario Olosa. So Bodega in Spanish is winery, and Dario Olosa is the names of the owners. In fact, this might be, if you have a bottle in your hand at some point in the future, and I'll just move that around so you can see there are some birds on the front label, and they call these black-necked swans, but I think they're a bit similar to geese, and you find them around the vineyard in Rio Negro, where this is based, in Patagonia in the south of Argentina. And what they've done is they've actually, this is representing the family that own the winery, the Dario Olosa family. So at the front here, you have Eduardo. Behind him is his wife, Maria. Then you have the three eldest daughters. And then right here at the back, you probably can barely see it on the camera, but there's just one just here. And that's Victoria, who's the youngest.
Yeah, that's a nice story.
And that's the reason for the what they call black-necked swans on the front of the label.
Okay.
But also the name Verum was also chosen for a very good reason, because Verum, for those that know Latin, is truth, and the whole idea is to demonstrate or provide a wine that demonstrates the vineyards and represents the vineyards with very minimal intervention, and hence truth being something that's true to the vines, you know, true to what's been created in this pretty magical place. In terms of the place, I've got this handy map, which on camera seems to be in reverse. Maybe when you're watching it, it will turn back again.
It looks fine, Lee. It's fine. It's the right way around.
On mine, I think because mine's reflecting it, it's a bit in reverse. But this is a map of Argentina I prepared earlier. As you can see, it's a very large country. It's 1.1 million square miles, which is about 11 times larger than the UK. So imagine putting, 11 of the UKs in there. And it changes a lot from north to south. And in general, you need to make wine within 30 to 50 degrees, either north or south of the equator. So if it's less than 30 degrees, too close to the equator and not good for winemaking. There are exceptions, which include Salta in the north of Argentina, where they plant very high altitude, so they get the cool nights, and that's at 25 degrees. But generally, it's between 30 and 50 degrees north or south of the equator. And Patagonia is right down here at around 42 degrees south of the equator, on a similar position as New Zealand and South Africa. And of course, they're countries that are also well known for their white wines. And actually, Pinot Noir is incredibly good from Patagonia, and something to think about because it's a cooler environment. And they make this beautiful Chardonnay. And going back to my comment with Christmas, you're probably thinking, what do I have with my my turkey on Christmas Day? And depends a bit on what you have with your turkey, but generally a white meat like turkey will work really well with a Chardonnay. And so this would be a perfect wine to serve with your meal. So what do you find? Okay, so this is a Chardonnay, as I've said, from Patagonia and Rio Negro. It's a cooler climate, and it has a beautiful color, slightly sort of a yellow straw color. That color is typical from Chardonnay. You tend to get more of a golden color in Chardonnay, particularly when it's had a bit of time in oak. And this has had a very small amount of time, in fairness. About only 10% of this wine has seen any oak, and that's American oak. So it's very much a fruit-driven wine, although you do pick up a little bit of that smokiness on the nose from the very delicate use of oak. But they don't want to suffocate the fruit. They want to allow the freshness and the fruit aromas to come through, and not to be interfered with by overuse of oak. So it's more there as a complementary addition to the wine. In terms of other aromas, you've got some orchard fruit, pears and apples. You do get that little smoky note, and there's almost like a steely note to it as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm definitely getting, that sort of steely, minerally character.
Yeah, like a mineral character, and that's something that this wine has offered for. God, we've had this. I mean, our business is 9 years old at the moment, and we've had this from the beginning. This is one of the first wineries we ship wines from, and they've always been a bit steely, a bit mineral. And those sort of orchard fruits, and making it really lovely and fresh as well.
Not dissimilar to a Chablis, is it, in terms of that sort of mineral character? It's not a big, heavy, oaky Chardonnay, is it? It's quite lean. And
it's interesting because the winemaker Agustin Lombroni has spent a few vintages in Burgundy, and he's a big Burgundy fan. Because the climate is so good for Burgundian varieties like Chardonnay, like Pinot Noir. And so in some respects, it's no surprise that his style of Chardonnay is close to that of a Burgundy. And in terms of climate, it is so much cooler down there. Yeah. It's cooler, but also windy. And if you can see the label closer, you'd see there's some indentations across the label to sort of demonstrate the wind that goes through. And that wind is fantastic for keeping the vines very healthy. And particularly with Pinot Noir, which is very susceptible to problems in the vineyard from.
And is Chardonnay the only white varietal that they plant, Lee?
Yeah, you can also find some Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon in this region. We used to have a Sauvignon Blanc, but they put their focus now in the Chardonnay. I think they sell the grapes now for the Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, I see. So the guys at there only produce a Chardonnay in terms of white wines. Yeah,
this moment they produce just this Chardonnay. In their range, and yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic place to visit. I mean, Patagonia is perhaps best known for its links to Wales, because I mean, I remember the first time I ever showed these wines back in 2012, and I was at a tasting in Pembrokeshire, and some people came up to me and said, "Oh, we're really excited to taste your Welsh wines," and I said, "Nope, we don't have any Welsh wines." But then obviously, I think obviously I knew what they were suggesting, but there are very strong links between Wales, because many families emigrated to this part of Argentina, in Patagonia, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, particularly from the north of Wales, but in other areas as well. And you can actually find Welsh-speaking Argentinians.
I was going to ask that, yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, and you'll get like Jose Evans and Juan Davis and things like that. So and you can have. In fact, my wife is from Buenos Aires, and there's an artisan chocolatier nearby, and they do lots of gifts and things. And I remember going there probably about 5 or 6 years ago. No, more than that, 7 or 8 years ago, and looking at some chocolates. And while I was there, I saw this box of Welsh cakes from Patagonia, of all places. And they do have Welsh tea and have chapel, and it's quite really. I mean, obviously, with a name like Evans, I'm half Welsh, so I understand the patriotism that you get in Wales, and it definitely carries and still survives over 100 years since.
And is rugby a key sport down there as well? I know it's in Argentina, but
yeah, I mean, rugby is I mean, football is so high up there in terms of popularity. And rugby too. I mean, the Argentinian rugby team are fairly successful.
Yeah, they are. The Pumas.
And the Pumas. And they've always. I think whenever we've been, mainly it's football really. rugby is quite way down in terms of popularity. Probably after basketball, they're really passionate about basketball, and of course polo. The English, very common game for the polo. And I did a tasting at a polo club a few years ago, and I was very interested to find that if you look at like the top 20 polo players, there's a big proportion of them, more than 10, I think, at least at that point, that were from Argentina. So it's a big thing in Argentina.
Yeah. And with Vermley, what would their sort of typical annual production be in terms of number of cases across their range of wines?
I mean, in terms of cases, I would say no more than sort of 10-15,000 cases.
Oh wow! So it's a really
very
small
production, boutique producer.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would vary depending on market conditions.
Yes, of course.
But, and the vineyards, they're very Agustin is very, he's such a passionate winemaker, and I guess they all are, but I mean, Agustin just is so passionate. He lives and breathes. I mean, he just lives at the winery, and he allows the vintage to dictate his wines. So you will see some vintage variation, which is not entirely common in a lot of Argentinian wines because the climate can be so consistent. But in Patagonia, they do have some varying vintages. And I noticed it more in the Pinot Noir which is very susceptible to vintage variation anyway. But you do notice it a bit in the Chardonnay when sometimes it can be a little bit leaner, other times a bit riper, and it's it's a cracking wine. It's
beautiful. I love all their wines. They're the Pinot Noir is amazing, and the Cabernet Franc's probably one of our best-selling wines, isn't it?
Well, the Cabernet Franc actually is a fluke, that we even have it, because I took it accidentally to a tasting thinking it was we have a Malbec from that range, and I had it as a sample, and it got mixed up with some samples at home, and I opened it at a tasting. Actually, that was in Wales, in Pembrokeshire, and I opened it at a tasting, and somebody came over and said, "Oh, you've got Cabernet Franc." I said, "I haven't." I said, "Yeah, you've got Cabernet Franc," and I've opened the wrong bottle. It was only a sample, and the owner of the business loved Cabernet Franc, and he said, "Oh, you need to ship that wine. You need to ship that wine." So we shipped it literally by fluke.
Yeah, right. And off it's gone.
But we work we've worked with Harrods for a number of years, and they listed that wine. That was the first wine they listed from us, the Cabernet Franc from Veron.
Oh, great.
So it's a really fantastic wine. It's my favourite wine from their range.
I've just become the biggest fan of Cabernet Franc from Argentina. Not the Loire Valley, but from Argentina. I love it.
Wow, there's such good value from Cabernet Franc just from Argentina. I think after Malbec, it's that sort of variety that you're seeing more and more excitement around. I think it's a fantastic variety. We've got a few in the range. So
okay, shall we move on to the red, if everyone's had their white?
So this is the Añosero. Now I'm going to say Tempranillo because my wife is from Buenos Aires, and I studied Spanish in Buenos Aires, so I'm a porteño, and we go sh with the double L. In Mendoza, they're a bit closer to the Spanish pronunciation. They do Tempranillo, so there are some. I mean, my pronunciation may be slightly far from perfect, but so if I say Tempranillo, it's because I learned Spanish in Buenos Aires, so I say it the way they do in Buenos Aires rather than maybe the way they say it. Certainly not the way they say it in Spain. So anyway, so this is the Añosero, which means year zero, and the reason it's year zero is because Karim Moussi, who's the winemaker, began this project in 1999, and his first vintage was the year zero, i.e. year 2000.
Okay, it's interesting.
So that's why it's called Añosero. Añosero means tall oak, and that's because they are present in where the winery is. And why Tempranillo and why in Argentina? Well, obviously the history of Argentina is Spanish in terms of it was a colony of Spain. I mean, over 400 years ago, the first Spanish arrived, and they brought with them vines. Obviously, you know, it was a key part of the religion to have wine. I'm sure it was a bit of social drinking as well, but that was a key part. So they brought with them the first vines, and the Spanish that settled in Mendoza, which is a moment ago we were talking about Patagonia was down here. Well, Mendoza is further up the country, about 32 degrees south of the equator, and it's the main area of production in Argentina. So it represents, I always hear different figures, but let's say 70 to 75% of production. So if you've had a wine from Argentina, unless you bought it from a specialist like Taste Argentina, who have many different regions, but if you haven't, then you probably would have had only really drunk wines from Mendoza, because it's such a large part of this of Argentinian exports. So the Spanish that settled here, there's an area that's renowned for very high quality wines called the Uca Valley, and it can be quite susceptible to frost because it's quite high altitude. So I guess we've had people on here a few times talking about altitude, but in short, it's obviously a continental position in terms of the vineyards. There's no ocean or influence at all. You've got the Andes on the west. You've got a vast area of plains on the Pampas to the right. And it's quite hot, being that close to the equator. So what they do is they plant up in the Andes, up in the foothills of the Andes Mountains, and that altitude brings cooler nights, and it's the balance of the hot days and the cool nights that provides a lot of the character that you find in Argentinian winemaking. It allows them to make wines, because if they didn't have those cool nights, they'd just be too hot to make serious wines, really. But also high altitude brings UV light, and UV light gives the grapes encourages the grapes to develop thicker skins. Like you or I, when we go out in the sun, we put on our sun lotion to protect our skin. Well, the grape wants to protect the seeds, because that's its future. So it thickens the skins to protect the seeds, and a lot of the color 100% comes from the skins in red wines, and a lot of the character as well comes from those skins. So that's another reason why altitude and the position where they plant in the Andes Mountains is so important. But the first Spanish, when they planted in the Uca Valley, they found the Tempranillo, which is obviously synonymous with Spain. I think it's like the 5th or 6th largest planted variety in the world, and most famous for Rioja, where the wines are made from Tempranillo, or Tempranillo. When they landed in the Uca Valley, they found La Consulta as a sub-region of the Uca Valley was particularly favourable for Tempranillo, because in other parts of the Uca Valley they suffered with frost with the Tempranillo, and in the La Consulta it had less of an issue, less of a problem. But it's the second most planted variety in this sub-region. Obviously, no points for guessing the most planted variety, but so there's a good reason to have a Tempranillo in your range if your winery, as is Karim's winery, is based in La Consulta. So to not have Tempranillo wouldn't be true to the origins of that area. So he treats his Tempranillo like he would like they would in Spain, and there's a bit of oak here. Let me pour, because I shouldn't be talking out of wine without having wine in my glass.
Lee, just looking at the colour of the wine, you know how you were just saying about the thick skins. It looks so much darker and deeper than a Rioja, and I guess that's the colour coming from the thick skins, isn't it? It's so dark and concentrated. Looking at it, I would never think that was a Tempranillo grape at all.
You'd probably need to speak to somebody working in the vineyards and someone like Karim to know the exact reason.
Yeah.
But I would hazard a good guess that the thickness of the skins from being at high altitude is a good part of it.
Definitely.
And also
colour.
they maybe spend a bit more time on its skins as well, which would impart more colour. And traditionally in Rioja, this would be aged, you know, for, was it minimum 6 months?
Well, yeah, 12 for Criantha and on from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but this has had only 30% on oak, and an American oak, which is odd because Karim never uses American oak in all of his wines. And you know, this is a winemaker that makes a huge number of wines, and you know, lots of them gaining renown. But this is the only wine he makes with American oak, and that's because it's a nod to its origins, and because that's the oak they use in Spain. So if they can, his view is, if they've spent hundreds of years refining the art of making Tempranillo in Rioja, then why would he try to do anything different?
Yeah.
The only difference he does do though is he doesn't oak it quite as much. It's only 30% on American oak. So yeah, 30% on American oak.
I think
sorry, let's go.
I was just going to say, I mean, looking at the way the Spanish have changed their sort of stance on their aging, because they've introduced new classifications based more on the quality of the grapes and the terroir, you know, in the last couple of years. It's probably more akin to that than the historical aging system in Rioja, I guess.
Modern style of Rioja.
Yeah, definitely.
I think so. I mean, all of Karim's wines have a beautiful freshness about them, and fine structure, very rounded tannings. It's not aggressive at all, and it's very easy to drink, and would go well with, in terms of food, something gamey would work quite well. You know, most roast meats. So if you're going along on Christmas Day, for instance, as we go back to Christmas Day, and you're going to go for something gamey rather than your turkey, then you could look at a Tempranillo would work quite well in that environment. Yeah, it's just such an incredibly good wine, and
is this a great
fruit, like black and red cherry, and you really get those sort of, you do get those notes of tobacco from the American oak, and a little touch of
lovely spice and warmth as well.
And are they drinking this
fireside wine?
Is this drunk in Argentina, you know, heavily, Lee, as well, or is it more of a wine for export for Karim? Right?
I mean,
Argentinians drink this.
He's fairly successful with this wine. Obviously, even in Argentina, they drink a lot of their own wine. They're the 7th largest in terms of consumption in the world. So they do drink a lot, but a lot of that will be, you know, sort of house, you know, table wines that are blends, that might not even have the variety. But the Tempranillo is, I would say it's not so widely, but because it is the second most planted variety in La Consulta, locally in that area, they will drink a lot of
yeah.
And it's gaining some notoriety. I mean, because the great history of, or the varietal history of Argentina is so, you know, we've got Chardonnay, Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon. These are the great French varieties. There's, although very strong Italian heritage amongst many of the wineries, there's not so many Italian varieties. And among the sort of Spanish varieties, it's only really Tempranillo.
Yes, of course.
There's too many ways of saying this word.
It's fine.
I'm going to settle on Tempranillo, I think. I've called it for many times. But yeah, I think that it's really nice modern style of Tempranillo, like you said, reflecting that style that you've more recently seen in Rioja. And you know, really versatile wine, and you know, it's something that if you see from Argentina, you should try.
In terms of the altitude, what is it, about 1,200 meters above sea level?
This is 1,200 meters. So this is, if you ever visit Argentina, people have this idea that we talk about altitude, so it's 1,200 meters above sea level, so it's up in the mountains, and their view is like a European view, so that these vineyards are sat on these incredibly steep slopes on the way up on mountain sides, but it's not really like that. They're like on plateaus, huge, huge areas, quite relatively flat. But if you drive for half an hour, you go up 100 meters, and you drive for another half an hour, you go up another 100 meters.
Yeah, okay.
It's very gradual climb, but it's a fantastic backdrop. I mean, you know, the first time I went to Orco Valley, and it's renowned for being very close to the mountains. It was overcast. I couldn't see a thing. I was so annoyed. And then when I went back the next time, and really fantastically, it was, and it's not very often it gets overcast. I mean, Mendoza gets like 200 milliliters of rain a year. So to have an overcast day is just incredibly unlucky. But you are so close to the mountains, and it's just such an impressive backdrop. And you can just see the snow caps. Of course, that's another reason why altitude is important in Argentina, because that's the source of the water. And you know, this is pretty much a desert. If they weren't so close to the mountains, they weren't able to channel the snowmelt waters that comes in great torrents down from the Andes. It feeds all the vineyards and you know, brings life to this area. And this area is renowned, you know, not just for grapes and the wines. It's a big production for agriculture in terms of fruits as well. So yeah, so it's a paradise, a winemaker's paradise.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you very much, Lee. Just to say, we've got both of those wines in stock. So if you're looking for some inspiration on Christmas Day, then there's the Verum Chardonnay and the Anno Zero Tempranillo. And I guess Merry Christmas to everyone. Cheers.
Merry Christmas.
Cheers, Lee.
Cheers.
Cheers.